Pleasure to be here. First of all, thank you very much to Park Street, to Emily and Emmett for hosting and for organising all of this. And thank you all for being here, especially on day 3 of BCB. You owe yourself a round of applause. So my name's Ben. I'm the co-owner of a company called Phoenyx Spirits. So we revive exceptional spirits brands. So we have a portfolio of trademarks of intellectual property in heritage spirits brands across a range of different categories. Most of them date back to the 19th century, some slightly earlier, some slightly later, and are either UK brands with UK provenance or US provenance. And last year we revived and launched the first 2 brands from our portfolio, which you can see on the screen. Koosh, which is an exotic orange bitter liqueur, and Dr. Hostetter's, which is the original American red bitter liqueur. So both bitter liqueurs, 20% ABV bitter liqueurs. And our focus to date has been launching it and seeding the brands in the UK on trade. I'll talk a little bit more about the brands in due course, but just very quick kind of introduction. Why am I here, I suppose, talking about marketing and talking about building brand awareness? So actually the kind of majority of my career was spent working for a company called WPP, which is the world's largest marketing communications group. So latterly I was running WPP sort of specialist brand agency across the Asia region. So I have a lot of experience in terms of working with big corporate brands, the likes of Coca-Cola, Samsung, HSBC, on all things kind of brand strategy, including strategies around maximizing brand awareness. So that's sort of a part of this that I'm quite well versed in, quite familiar with. And then very excitingly, Rob, my co-founder, and I, as of last year, launched not just Phoenyx Spirits, but launched Koosh and Dr. Hostetter's, as I said, into the UK market. The photo of us on the screen there is at Imbibe, the trade fair in London last year. So I guess I have both the kind of marketing experience, but also very much living the realities of an early stage brand owner right now. And hopefully those 2 things will be of interest to some of you, and I can bring some learnings. And just what I wanted to put on stage here is that's the lens through which I'm going to talk today around how to think about amplifying brand awareness, right? So early stage brands and on-trade focus, because Koosh and Dr. Hostetter's as bitter liqueurs, as modifiers, primarily our focus at this early stage anyway is on-trade driven. So, you know, hopefully there are some of you either thinking about starting your own brand, directly involved in developing your own brands, advising other early stage founders, and hopefully there'll be some learnings or perspective that you can take away. And I also wanted to say, you know, I think often there's a narrative in our industry which says that, you know, being an early stage founder is awful. It's a nightmare. It's so challenging that the odds are completely stacked against you, right? You know, it's highly competitive as an industry. Many markets, including the UK, are pay-to-play driven. The majors dominate. You know, how on earth can you kind of be positive, see the light at the end of the tunnel? And I actually think I'd like to bring a slightly different perspective to this, which is to say, you know, sometimes having limited resources, having limited budgets, forces you into being more singular, more single-minded in the strategies that you execute. And actually, I think that sometimes can be helpful. That can be directive, and it can be a positive thing. So, this is a quote from a guy called David Ogilvy, who is one of the sort of pioneers of modern advertising, one of the original madmen. And he said, "Give me the freedom of a tight brief." And I like that thought as just a sort of a thought to kind of share with you all. I like that. I think it's a nice perspective to bring, and that's very much the perspective that I'll share today. So. This is not rocket science. I've got 3 simple strategies for maximizing brand awareness. And I've thought about it across the life cycle for an early stage brand, right? So before you're even in market, as you're creating your brand, you're going through the development stage, what can you be thinking about in those early days that will help you to create a brand that does maximize brand awareness in the future? Then launch and then engagement. So once you're out in market, you're engaging with the trade. Again, how are you thinking about maximizing brand awareness? And for each of these, I will illustrate with an example from our experience with Koosh and Dr. Hostetter's. Okay, so the first strategy, throughout the creation phase, use brand as a North Star to guide all decision making. Okay, again, very, very simple thought here, which is to say that, you know, as an early stage brand, the reality is you don't have budgets to do sexy, expensive, above-the-line advertising, right? You are not Belvedere Vodka enlisting Daniel Craig for some amazing new global ad, right? The reality is that, when you go into, we saw Eric Lorenz on the slides before, when you go into quaint Mayfair and you get maybe your 3 to 5 minutes with Eric to do your pitch for your brand, the context in which you're trying to build brand awareness is really the product, right? It's the bottle that you're putting on the table in front of that bar owner, in front of that bar manager, bar director. And so it's ultra important at the creation phase that the elements that go into that product are completely synced and are reinforcing a singular and single-minded brand message. So for Koosh, as I said, this is a brand that dates back to the 19th century. We've kind of revitalized Koosh as the exotic orange bitter liqueur. And many of the pieces were relatively straightforward for us in the sense that they were directed by the original brand, so the brand from the 19th century. So we had a name, we had a visual identity which suggested something exotic that had, took inspiration from the East. It has this mythical lady sitting on the tiger. Who is she and what's she doing in a jungle? We don't quite know, but she has this lovely exotic tropical quality. So when it came to the liquid development itself, we were very mindful of trying to reinforce those qualities, exoticism, the kind of tropical nature of the brand, in the liquid brief itself. We had one, in fact, sort of almost the most important ingredient for the liquid was the bitter agent as a bitter liqueur. The bitter is something called Quassia amara, which we knew from our research was in the original. Quassia amara is a tree bark, which gives the bitterness to Koosh. But beyond that, we actually had freedom to create the liquid brief ourselves. So, for example, we made sure we had things in there like kumquat, like Darjeeling black tea, like turmeric, like kaffir lime leaves, for instance, all of which contribute to a flavor profile which is reinforcing that core brand message. And so to me, one of the most validating moments is when you go into a bar, someone is tasting your liquid, and without actually even talking through the brand story or having a chance to articulate the positioning, words are being played back to me like, yo, that's very exotic. That feels tropical. I can imagine that pairing, for instance, with rum very well. Okay, so again, it's not rocket science, but it's in those early stages, making sure that all of the elements of your brand are self-reinforcing is going to help amplify brand awareness once you're out there in the market. Strategy 2, so create clear differentiation at launch with a well-defined category positioning. What on earth does that mean? Well, I think, with any brand within a category, there's sort of a spectrum. One end of the spectrum, you're a kind of a Me Too product, right? You are mirroring the kind of either the category leader or the majority of brands within a specific category. And right at the other end of the spectrum, you are something uncategorizable, okay? And my personal view is you don't really want to be either of those things. I think maybe Phoenyx Spirits is the only brand I can think of who've done a good job of being sort of difficult to define and uncategorizable. But for the most part, you don't want to be there, right? You want to be able to carve out some white space. So I think sort of question number one you have to ask yourself is, am I very clear on the category in which I'm existing, that I want to play? And then question number two is, am I very clear on how to carve out and own white space within that category, which is unique and authentic to my brand and who I am? You'll be amazed to hear that this beautiful chart on the left-hand side, I actually created that myself. I've got McKinsey calling. I call this the pimple chart. Very simple chart is to say, you don't want to be brand X, okay? As an early stage brand, you don't want to be brand X because, again, let's imagine this moment. You go into Eric's bar, you go into quaint Mayfair, and you start telling your brand story, and immediately Eric's thinking, yeah, but this is just another Me Too product. I've already got 2 or 3 of those in my portfolio. I don't need another of these brands. Okay, very difficult to create brand awareness, standout, memorability in that context. Whereas brand Y, I'm making it easy for a bartender, a bar manager, a bar director to buy me, to be interested in me, because I've contextualized what my brand is about. They understand I'm playing in the red bitter liqueur category. That gives them a frame of reference for which to think about, okay, how am I going to deploy that brand? What types of cocktails am I going to create using this new red bitter liqueur? But I'm also doing it in a way that's unique and differentiated. So for Dr. Hofstetter's, I mentioned that this is a brand that has American provenance. Amazingly, Dr. Hofstetter's has a very storied history in the US. It was actually, in the 19th century, the preeminent medicinal red bitter liqueur in the US. They sold over 50 million bottles by the early 20th century. So a huge brand. And so the American provenance is really what's unique and differentiated for us within the red bitter liqueur space. So when I'm having those conversations with bar directors, bar managers, and so on, and I'm saying to them, okay, here's the provenance story within the context of a category, and here's how that translates into a drink strategy. You know, you've got a lovely bourbon or a lovely rye whiskey, pair that with this American red bitter liqueur, and suddenly you've got, a really interesting boulevardier, a really interesting recipe for a Manhattan, etc. So I think all of that is around differentiation and owning white space that is authentic to the brand. And third and final strategy, use simple everyday tactics as the most effective means of engaging the on-trade. And again, this comes back to that David Ogilvy quote, right, around having, or sort of perspective around limited resources. You know, you walk around a trade show like Bar Convent, or you spend much time on LinkedIn, and as an early stage brand with limited budgets, you feel a lot of FOMO. You think, oh my God, I wish I could do activation X with star bartender Y. Wouldn't that be wonderful? Forget it. You're not going to do that because you don't have the budgets. You don't have the stature as a brand to enlist those people. So focus instead on doing the simple everyday things right, as well as you possibly can. And actually, there are some benefits to these limitations. Again, going back to that quote. So what you can see on screen is just a snapshot of some of the kind of merchandise and, I suppose, engagement strategies that we're deploying for both Dr. Hofstetter's and Koosh. Point number one is to go in, we never leave small samples. So I know the category convention says, don't leave a whole bottle. That's far too expensive. What a cost. But actually, if you think about it, if you only leave a small sample as you go into a bar, you're only really allowing maybe one or two bartenders to play with your liquid, right? And that's actually a bit of an odd approach. For us, we'd much rather leave a bottle, which is what we always do, because that means that, yes, your bar manager or your bar director, but also actually the entire bar team are going to have an opportunity to play with, maybe fail with some cocktails, but also build some fantastic cocktails and get engaged around your brand. Likewise, for Dr. Hofstetter's, we've created what we call internally the Pass Forward campaign. Very simple mechanism where we'll go to a bar, drop off a pack, which includes samples of Dr. Hofstetter's, but also an empty bottle. And we say to them, look, have your team play around with Dr. Hofstetter's, create a cocktail that they're passionate about, and then have them pass forward that cocktail to another bar that they are friends with or that they are engaged with for that bar team's team drinks, okay? And so what you're doing there as a brand is you're offering something, you're not putting yourself necessarily at the front of that conversation. That suddenly becomes a conversation between two bars who are creating a relationship, and that's really a fantastic sort of position to be in as an early stage brand, because what you're doing there is helping to kind of create community and create relationships. So what I'm talking about here is very simple, quite cost effective. These are not huge costs we're talking about in developing things like keychains, T-shirts, and this Pass Forward campaign. But again, just a more inclusive, open way about thinking of engaging the on-trade. So, quick summary, 3 simple strategies. Use brand as a North Star to guide all your decision-making in that early creation development phase. And what you're doing there is making sure that every interaction with your product is reinforcing that brand essence. So for Koosh, the exotic orange bitter liqueur, reinforced by the name, by the packaging, the bottle, the liquid, and also the brand story. Strategy 2, launch with a well-defined category positioning. And what that's going to do, which is so important, is establish differentiation, right? You want to be able to walk out of that bar after the 5 minutes you get with the bartender in a busy bar environment. You want them to understand immediately where you fit in that portfolio and why they must have you, because actually that's white space. That's a gap that currently their product portfolio is not fulfilling. And then finally, use simple everyday tactics to engage the on-trade. And again, the outcome there, hopefully, is something that feels more inclusive. This is not brands only talking to the senior decision makers or the star bartender. It's actually more democratic. It's about building grassroots relationships that over time will really benefit you from a brand awareness point of view. So hopefully when you look at those outcomes, you can see that all of those things are designed, again, in the context of an early stage brand, at reinforcing and maximizing brand awareness. Thanks very much. If you are interested in learning more about the brands, please follow us on or have a look at us on Instagram, at Koosh Bitter, at Dr. Hofstetter's, and more than happy to take questions or engage with any of you via email.